Christmas Eve in Savannah, the bells rang in the white man's church, their iron tongues echoing across streets lit with lanterns and laughter. The sound drifted over the city like a hymn of joy. But further out, where the cane fields stretched into darkness, the same bells struck like knives in the ears of the enslaved, their groans carried on the wind, low and hollow, lost beneath the carols. In the grand houses, firelight glowed warm, tables groaned under roasted meat, and the brothers of the plantation raised cups of wine. But in the quarters, hunger gnawed at ribs, backs ached from the day's whippings, and silence pressed like a stone. Rosa stood in that silence. She was young, but her eyes had already hardened into something older, something unbreakable. She carried trays, bent her head when spoken to, and never let them see the fire burning inside. She had learned that her face must stay calm while cruelty played out before her, that her tongue must stay still while others screamed. She had lived her years marked by scars and chains, yet nothing in her bearing suggested surrender. She watched, she endured, and she remembered. That night, while the bells praised the birth of Christ, Rosa felt the weight of another promise forming inside her. The four brothers laughed too loud, their boots heavy on the wooden floors, their hands careless as they slapped backs and pulled women from the kitchen to pour their drinks. To them, Christmas was another night of power, another reminder that their joy rested on the pain of others. To Rosa, it was the last night they would ever raise a cup. The narrator's voice draws close, heavy and slow, as though every word is being pulled from the soil itself. By dawn, 4 brothers would be dead, and the soil of Savannah would drink their blood. The morning sun in Savannah did not rise gently for Rosa. It burned. It burned on the fields where she bent her back, her fingers raw from pulling at cotton bolls until they bled. The overseer's voice carried across the rows like a whip itself, barking commands, spitting insults. Behind his shadow was always the lash, leather cutting the air, promising pain for anyone who dared slow down. Rosa knew its sting too well. Her back was a map of scars, each mark a memory carved into her skin by men who believed pain was the only language she deserved to understand. Yet beneath those scars her spirit pulsed steady, unbroken, like coals glowing red in the ashes. Day after day she worked under skies that offered no mercy. The cotton tore her hands, the sun blistered her skin, and still she laboured, not for herself, but for the pockets of the brothers who claimed her life as theirs. Each one had his own brand of cruelty, and together they were an unholy choir of torment. The eldest was the whipmaster. He believed discipline was the foundation of wealth, and his belt sang across the backs of men and women with every minor mistake. He took pride in counting lashes, boasting to guests how high a person could scream before their throat gave out. Rosa could still remember nights when the air smelled of iron from fresh blood, and his laughter followed her into her dreams. The second brother was the thief of nights. He roamed the quarters after dark, reeking of liquor, dragging women from their straw pallets, using them as he pleased. Rosa had felt his shadow more than once, had seen other women crawl back to their corners, broken and silent, clutching their torn dresses. He left no mark with whips, only with shame and violation, wounds that never healed. The third brother was a jester, but his jokes were daggers. He delighted in mockery, forcing enslaved men to dance until their legs buckled, demanding songs while tears still streamed from their eyes. He tossed scraps on the ground and made Rosa crawl for them, laughing as though she were a dog. He told guests that laughter was the best tool for reminding the enslaved of their place, and his cruelty was coated with grins and toasts. Rosa hated him most for the way he could make others laugh while she bled inside. The youngest brother was not as loud, but his greed cut deeper. He managed the markets, the auctions, the sales. He was the one who broke families apart with a smile, who measured black children like cattle, who sold mothers away from infants without a pause. Rosa remembered standing on the block once, watching him trade a boy no older than 12 to settle a debt, his voice calm, his ledger clean. He did not need to strike or rape. His power was colder, built on numbers and ink, but it destroyed lives all the same. Together, the brothers held the plantation like a fist. Rosa was caught within it every day, a body ordered to serve, a face ordered to bow. Yet in her silence she observed them. She learned their patterns, their weaknesses, the way the eldest's temper burned hot when he drank, the way the second staggered when too deep in the bottle, the way the third let his guard down when laughter filled the hall, the way the youngest trusted his books more than his blade. Every cruelty they dealt her became a memory she sharpened into a weapon. The narrator's voice lingers, heavy as the fields themselves. Rosa's life in chains was not just her burden. It was the burden of all who bent their bodies to the land, all who endured humiliation so white men could grow rich. Yet in her heart, what the brothers thought they had broken was only bending. Deep inside Rosa, the chains were not binding her, they were forging her. The cruelty of the brothers did not end in the fields. It followed Rosa into the house, into the dim corridors and kitchens where she was made to serve. Small mistakes, the kind no one could avoid, became reasons for punishment. A drop of wine spilled on the table, a dish not polished to their liking, a glance they considered too bold. Each was met with the whip. Sometimes it was leather across her back, sometimes the buckle across her arms, sometimes the flat crack of it on her face. Pain was their language, and they spoke it fluently. There were nights when Rosa was ordered to serve during their feasts. The smell of roasted meat, warm bread, spiced wine filled the hall, but none of it passed her lips. Her stomach clenched as she watched them eat until their bellies swelled, while she stood silent in the shadows. If she so much as looked too long at a scrap left on a plate, one of them would snatch it up and throw it to the dogs, laughing at her hollow eyes. Hunger gnawed at her, but worse than the hunger was the humiliation of being starved in the middle of plenty, treated as less than the hounds, snapping at bones under the table. Sometimes the cruelty wore another mask, the cruelty of the auction block. Rosa had stood on the dirt yard when the youngest brother lined families in a row. Children clung to mothers. Men clutched their wives' hands, knowing what was coming but powerless to stop it. The brother read their names like items in a list, his voice steady and casual, as if he were selling barrels of grain. Rosa watched a boy torn from his mother's arms, screaming until his voice broke, dragged to the cart while she collapsed in the dust. She watched husbands pressed down by overseers as their wives were led away, their pleas ignored. And she saw the brothers' faces. No sympathy, only pride in their commerce. To them, people were coin. To Rosa, it was another scar written on her soul. The punishment sometimes came not as blows, but as spectacles. One evening, Rosa was forced to kneel on the wooden floor of the great hall, a bucket beside her. She scrubbed the boards until her fingers split, blood mixing with the water. The brothers sat nearby, drinking, their boots stretched out, watching as if it were entertainment. One of them, the jester, leaned forward with a candle in hand. A drop of wax fell onto her back, searing her skin. She flinched, biting her lip to keep from crying out. They laughed, and more drops followed, each one sizzling against her flesh. "Scrub faster," they jeered. "Maybe the fire will make you clean." The narrator's voice does not soften here. It lingers on the breaking of spirit, the way pain alone was not enough for them. They sought to strip dignity, piece by piece, to make Rosa feel not just enslaved, but less than human. And yet, even on her knees with wax burning her skin, Rosa's eyes remained fixed on the floorboards. Not because she accepted her fate, but because she was memorizing every grain of wood, every creak in the hall, every path between the tables. While they laughed at her suffering, she was gathering knowledge. They thought they were crushing her. In truth, they were tempering something far stronger. Families were broken, bodies scarred, dignity torn apart. That was the life the brothers created, and they wore it like a crown. But in the silence after their laughter, in the dark when Rosa returned to the quarters, the weight of those cruelties did not vanish. They pressed into her chest, into the marrow of her bones, until they became something else. The lashings, the hunger, the humiliation, the auction block, all of it fed a fire no whip could extinguish. Something inside Rosa began to shift. Fear had long been her companion, stitched into her skin with every lash of the whip, every cruel laugh, every empty night of hunger. But fear was no longer enough to hold her. It thinned, burned away, and in its place settled a quiet, steady rage, not the wild anger that flares and dies, but a fire that glowed low and hot, waiting, patient, unstoppable. It started with the smallest acts. A bent nail left forgotten near the stables found its way into her hands. She hid it beneath her straw pallet, turning it over at night, feeling its weight like a promise. A broken bone from a butchered animal was sharpened against stone until its edge cut her thumb. She whispered no words of prayer, but her silence was its own litany. Each tool she hid, Each fragment of metal or wood she tucked away was another verse in her secret hymn. The plantation slept heavy in those nights. The brothers drank deep, and their laughter echoed from the big house long after the enslaved had collapsed in exhaustion. Rosa lay awake, eyes open to the dark, listening. She counted the steps of the guards, the groan of the doors when the brothers stumbled in and out, the sound of keys scraping against the hall table. She learned when the kitchen went cold, when the dogs were most restless, when silence wrapped the yard like a blanket. Every detail was stored inside her as carefully as the scars on her back. Whispers stirred among the quarters. At first, just fragments, a word, a glance, a muttered sentence when no overseer was near. "Christmas Eve," someone said, voice low as smoke. "They'll be drunk." Another voice answered, "That will be the night." The words carried like sparks in dry grass, small and unseen, but dangerous all the same. Rosa did not speak them aloud, but when she heard, her heart beat in rhythm with their hope. She had known despair. She had seen men beaten until they could not stand, women sold until their cries went hoarse, children torn from their mothers. Hope was a dangerous thing in such a place, fragile as glass. And yet, in the silence of those whispered plans, hope turned into something sharper. It became the promise of vengeance, not only for Rosa, but for all of them. The narrator lingers on Rosa's stillness, her careful composure. Outwardly, she was the same. Head bowed, hands busy, her body bending under orders. But inside, she no longer bent. Her silence had weight now, a thickness the brothers could not read. They thought her broken. They thought her obedient. They never saw the fire growing in her eyes when she dared lift them for a moment too long. They never felt the tension in her hands as she gripped the bucket, the knife, the rope. In the quarters, the enslaved did not call her leader. They did not name her savior. They simply looked to her when their whispers fell into silence. They saw the way she carried herself, scarred but unyielding. And something passed between them, unspoken. Her vengeance was not hers alone. It was the vengeance of every back bent under the sun, every child taken, every song silenced. The narrator's voice drops into a hush, as though speaking a truth too sacred to shout. Rosa's rage was not madness. It was memory sharpened into steel, and when the bells of Christmas Eve rang again in Savannah, their joy would drown in blood. The house blazed with firelight on Christmas Eve, its windows glowing like beacons in the dark. Music drifted through the open doors, fiddles and flutes, the kind of tunes that made boots stamp against the polished floorboards. Laughter rolled out into the night, carried by men already drunk on wine and women drunk on their own finery. The smell of roasted goose and spiced ham filled the hall, thick and heavy, while servants scurried like shadows, their arms full of trays and jugs. Rosa moved among them, a ghost in rags. Her dress hung loose and worn, patched in places, bare at the shoulders where candlelight revealed the scars that no cloth could hide. She carried platters stacked with meat, pitchers sloshing with red wine, and she did so with her head lowered, her eyes hidden. To the guests, she was invisible, an object of use, no more worthy of acknowledgement than the table she set. Yet behind lowered lashes, her gaze flickered with fire, and her silence held a weight none of them could sense. The brothers were in their glory. The eldest boasted of the harvest, pounding the table with his fist as he drank. The second, flushed and staggering, pulled women near, laughing with wine-stained lips. The third made cruel jokes at the expense of the servants, forcing one man to dance for the amusement of his guests while they clapped their hands. The youngest sat back, more composed, but with a cold smile as he spoke of debts paid and profits doubled, his satisfaction no less cruel than the lash. The white women sneered at Rosa when she passed, wrinkling their noses as if the air grew sour in her presence. One leaned close to whisper in another's ear, their laughter sharp as glass. They mocked the way her rags trailed the floor, the way she bowed too deep, the way her hands shook when she poured. None of them saw the tremor for what it was. None of them guessed it came not from fear, but from the effort it took to keep her rage from spilling out too soon. The feast carried on, swelling louder with every emptied cup. The fiddlers played faster. Men shouted to be heard over the music. Boots thumped on the boards. Dogs barked in excitement at scraps thrown from the table. The air was thick with heat and smoke, a furnace of indulgence where cruelty passed for merriment. Rosa wove through it all, her shadow cast long across the walls, her presence as unnoticed as the knife she kept hidden in the folds of her dress. The narrator's voice cuts through the din, low and ominous. The night was swollen with laughter, but under the table, Rosa's hand gripped the handle of her hidden blade. Every step she took, every jug she set down, brought her closer to the moment that would split joy into terror. Around her, the brothers celebrated as if nothing in the world could touch them, as if the soil itself bent to their will. They did not see the way the soil was shifting beneath their feet. They did not hear the silence waiting in Rosa's chest, the silence that would soon erupt into screams. The feast stretched long into the night, the air heavy with wine and smoke, the brothers bellowing like kings in their hall. Rosa moved with the patience of a shadow, her eyes calm, her body steady. She had waited years for this moment, and it was no sudden burst of fury that guided her, but something colder, sharper, shaped by pain and memory. The eldest brother was the first to fall. He staggered from the hall, drunker than the rest, boasting to anyone who would listen about the whip he kept hanging above his bed. He stumbled toward the stables, his boots dragging in the dirt. The horses whinnied at his approach, their breath steaming in the winter air. Rosa followed silently, her hand tight around the rusted blade she had hidden for months. He fumbled with the door, muttering curses when the latch caught. That was when she stepped forward. One swift motion, and the blade tore across his throat. His eyes went wide, but no cry escaped. Only a wet gasp as his body buckled. He collapsed among the hay, the whipmaster silenced by the very woman he had scarred. Rosa did not flinch. She wiped the blade against his coat and slipped back into the night. The second brother was easier still. He reeled down the hallway of the house, a bottle in one hand, the other pawing at the walls for balance. He laughed to himself, a cruel, broken laugh, the kind that once announced his midnight visits to the quarters. But tonight there was no victim waiting, no woman to drag from her bed. Tonight, Rosa waited in the shadows of the hall. As he reached for his pistol, sensing movement too late, she drove the blade into his chest. His breath hitched, the bottle shattered at his feet, and his hand clawed at the wound as if he could pull the steel from his heart. She twisted once, steady, and his body crumpled against the wall. Rosa leaned close, not with hatred in her eyes but with the stillness of judgment. His cruelty ended not with a scream, but with silence. The third brother stumbled into the yard, his face pale, his stomach rebelling against the feast he had gorged upon. He bent over to vomit in the dirt, his back exposed, his laughter from earlier now reduced to heaves. Rosa approached him with a chain, one she had taken from the barn. The links clinked softly as she wrapped it around his neck. He clawed at it, staggered, and tried to cry out, but the sound died in his throat. She pulled with all the strength the years of labor had carved into her muscles, her arms burning, her teeth clenched. His legs kicked against the ground, his fingers tore at the iron, but she did not loosen her grip. She thought of the songs he had mocked, the games he forced, the way he turned pain into entertainment. His body went limp in her hands, and she let him fall, the chain heavy in the mud. Inside, the music still played, though the notes faltered as whispers spread of missing brothers. The youngest, the one who had sold families, sat in the hall with a ledger beside his wine, his mind too slow to sense the shift in the air. Rosa entered then, her blade slick, her face calm. The guests fell silent as she stepped into the light, dragging the fourth brother by his collar, forcing him into the center of the hall. His protests broke into shouts, demanding someone stop her, ordering overseers to act. But the overseers hesitated, their eyes flicking between Rosa's steady gaze and the blood staining her dress. The guests shrank back, clutching at one another, the laughter of an hour ago replaced with fear. The youngest brother's voice cracked with rage, but Rosa's did not rise. She said nothing. She held him steady, her hand firm in his hair, and with one motion slit his throat before them all. The blood poured onto the boards, splattering the feast, staining the very table where they had mocked her hunger. His body sagged, his eyes wide in disbelief, and Rosa let him fall in front of his guests, his power undone in a single stroke. The hall erupted in chaos. Women screamed, men shouted, chairs toppled, glasses shattered. Overseers rushed forward, but stopped short when they saw Rosa's face. It was not the face of madness, not the wild frenzy of one overcome. It was the face of justice, calm, relentless, undeniable. The enslaved who stood in the shadows whispered the words like a prayer. It has begun. The narrator's voice holds heavy, like the toll of a bell. Rosa was not merely killing men. She was tearing down years of cruelty in a single night. Each brother's fall was a reckoning. Each drop of blood an answer to the screams of the auction yard, the hunger of the quarters, the scars carved into flesh. Guests fled, overseers trembled, and the enslaved began to move, their silence breaking into motion. The world had changed in a single night, and in the center of the storm stood Rosa, her blade dripping, her body still, her eyes steady. She was no longer servant, no longer shadow. She was vengeance made flesh, and nothing would unmake her now. The moment the youngest brother's body fell, the hall dissolved into chaos. Guests screamed and clawed for the doors, their silks and jewels dragging in the blood that pooled across the floorboards. Overseers, who only hours earlier strutted with whips at their sides, looked at one another with uncertainty. Their authority, once so unquestioned, now trembled in the air like smoke before a wind. Some rushed forward, shouting orders, but their voices cracked, hollow against the silence Rosa carried. Others turned and fled into the yard, fear on their heels. Then came the spark. An old man in the corner, scarred across his cheek from years in the fields, seized a poker from the fireplace and swung it hard against the nearest overseer's skull. The crack of iron on bone echoed like a signal. A woman who had carried trays all night dropped them and grabbed a knife from the table. Another tore a chair leg free and swung it with a scream that had been locked in her chest for years. The enslaved had waited too long for this moment, and Rosa's blade had shown them it was possible. The plantation erupted. Tools that had once been instruments of labor, hoes, scythes, axes, became weapons in hands that knew only toil. Men surged from the quarters, their shadows long in the torchlight, their fury longer still. Women who had been mocked, beaten, and violated raised their arms without hesitation. Overseers tried to rally, but their whips were nothing against the rage that poured forth. One was dragged from his horse and beaten until he no longer moved. Another tried to fire his pistol, but was struck down with the very chain he had used to bind others. The barns were the first to burn. Flames licked the sky as hay and timber caught, the fire roaring louder than the fiddles that had played in the hall. Sparks leapt to the cotton stores, the bales bursting into fire that painted the night in a red glow. Smoke spread thick, blotting out the stars, carrying with it the scent of scorched earth and long-delayed vengeance. The shouts of panic mingled with the roar of fire, the plantation transforming from a place of control into a battlefield. Through it all, Rosa moved with purpose. Blood marked her dress, but her steps were steady. She gathered a small band around her. Men who had swung scythes by her side, women who had been forced to scrub the floors beside her. They looked to her now, not because she claimed herself leader, but because she had lit the fire they followed. She told them nothing with words. Her silence was command enough. With a nod, she led them away from the blaze, toward the swamps that spread wide beyond the fields. The ground was wet beneath their feet, mud sucking at their ankles as they hurried. Behind them, the flames grew, an inferno swallowing years of cruelty. They did not look back. Though the glow painted their path, they moved fast, knowing that at dawn the patrols would come, men with hounds and rifles eager for blood. Every step mattered. Rosa's breath was steady as she pushed forward, the reeds whispering around her. The swamp accepted them in its dark arms, the water cold, the mud thick, but none faltered. They had carried heavier burdens for years. This was different. This was the weight of possibility. The narrator's voice lingers, solemn and reverent. Every step into the swamp was heavy with blood and freedom. Behind them, the plantation crumbled, a pyre of vengeance rising into the night sky. Before them stretched the unknown, thick with danger, but no longer with chains. Their bodies ached, their feet bled, but still they pressed forward. Each branch that scraped their skin, each pool of water that dragged at their legs, felt less like punishment and more like passage. Rosa led without fear. She knew death might wait in the dark, knew capture was a shadow always just behind them. Yet she also knew she would rather fall in the swamp's cold arms than live another day beneath the whip. Her companions felt it too. In the silence between their breaths, there was something new, a rhythm of hope, a pulse that had been buried under years of cruelty. And so they vanished into the mist, the night closing behind them, carrying with them the story of Savannah's Christmas Eve. The flames they left behind would fade by morning, But the memory of what had begun could not be doused. It had already spread, whispered in the dark, burning hotter than fire ever could. In the days that followed, the smoke over Savannah thinned, the fires quenched, the overseers regrouped, and patrols rode hard through the swamps searching for fugitives. But though Rosa and those who followed her seemed to vanish into the mist, her name did not vanish. It clung to the soil, to the whispering reeds, to the hearts of those who remained in chains. What had happened that Christmas Eve became more than a memory? It became a story. And in places where stories were all that people had left, stories could be sharper than steel. They whispered of her in the fields, their voices low so as not to draw the lash. The woman who killed 4 masters on Christmas Eve, they said, passing the words like a hidden flame from lip to ear. In the quarters at night, mothers hushed their children by murmuring her name, telling them not just to sleep, but to dream of her courage. Men who bent under the weight of the plough felt their backs straighten for a moment when they thought of her, a reminder that even chains could not crush every spirit. The songs began quietly, soft and hidden, woven into the rhythms of work. A line hummed under breath, a verse spoken in prayer. The words carried her deed across the rows, across the yards, and into the marrow of the people. Rosa became not just a woman but a myth, her knife and her silence standing beside Nat Turner's visions, Harriet Tubman's path through the dark woods, and the memory of Haiti, where the enslaved had risen and broken an empire. The people drew strength from these echoes, stringing them together like beads. Turner, Tubman, Haiti, Rosa. Her name fit there as if it had always belonged. Preachers. When they spoke in the hush arbors hidden beneath the trees, let her fire burn in their words. They spoke of judgment, of Pharaoh brought low, of the oppressor slain in the night. Though they never dared say her name aloud, every soul gathered knew who they meant. Her story became scripture of its own kind, one that told them not only to endure, but to imagine something beyond endurance. Rosa's face became blurred in the retelling. To some, she was tall as a tree, strong as a man, wielding her blade like lightning. To others, she was quiet as mist, her hands steady, her eyes calm, striking without a sound. Each telling shaped her into what was needed: a mother's hope, a father's strength, a child's lullaby. The truth of her body, her scars, her rags, mattered less than the truth of her act. She had done what so many dreamed of doing, and in that act, she belonged to them all. The narrator's voice grows soft, reverent. Rosa became the whisper in the dark that told the enslaved they were not powerless. She became the name that passed through lips cracked with hunger and throats raw with song. She became the fire that lived on, even when the overseer's whip struck. Myths are born not of peace but of defiance, and Rosa's defiance burned bright enough to join the constellations of resistance. Long after the blood had dried on the boards of the great hall, long after the brothers were laid in the earth, her legend walked in the fields where their laughter once rang. And in that legend, the enslaved found not just sorrow, but strength. For Rosa's story was no longer hers alone. It was theirs, carried forward on every breath, waiting for the day it would blaze again. The story of Rosa is not only the story of one woman's rage. It is the story of a world built on cruelty, a system that thrived on chains and blood, where suffering was measured in profit and flesh was counted as coin. For generations, men and women were torn from their homes, forced across oceans, and pressed into lives where their backs bent beneath the weight of another's wealth. Whips spoke louder than prayers, hunger silenced songs, and children were bartered away as if their cries carried no meaning. This was the world Rosa was born into, a world that tried to strip her of dignity, silence her voice, and teach her that she was nothing more than property. Her act of vengeance was not born in a single night, nor was it madness in her blood. It was the answer to centuries of injustice. Each lash, each humiliation, each sale of a child had planted its seed, and when the night came, those seeds bore fruit in fire and blood. Rosa did not create cruelty. She revealed it, turned it back upon those who had wielded it so easily. And in her silence, in her steady hand, she carried the weight of countless others who had dreamed of breaking free, but never had the chance. Slavery was designed to break the human spirit, to crush not just the body but the soul. Yet the fact of Rosa's defiance shows that even in the darkest corners, the spirit refused to die. It lived in whispered songs, in hidden prayers, in the quiet glances passed between the enslaved when overseers turned their backs. It lived in Rosa until it could no longer be contained. The narrator's voice falls into poetry as it closes. Her body vanished into the swamp, claimed by the mist and the reeds, lost to the searching hounds and the patrols that scoured the land. But her vengeance did not vanish with her. It thundered across generations, echoing in the hearts of those who remembered, in the songs that carried her name, in the hope that refused to be silenced. Rosa became more than flesh and bone. She became proof that chains could be broken, that cruelty could be answered, and that even in the face of an empire built on suffering, courage could carve its mark in blood. That was Savannah's Christmas Eve massacre. Rosa's story, a woman who turned holiday bells into war drums. One voice against an empire of cruelty, one hand raised against four who had believed themselves untouchable. Her blade cut deeper than flesh. It carved through the silence, through the fear, through the lie that the enslaved could not rise. Rosa's story is not only about blood spilled on wooden floors. It is about the fire of defiance that cannot be buried. If her story reached you, let it not fade into the dust. Speak her name, share her tale, carry it forward so the world remembers what the soil of Savannah once tried to swallow. Every comment, every reflection, every echo of her name is another strike against the silence history has tried to lay over such lives.